Hey everybody out there, hope this video finds all well with you and your family despite all the current craziness. I figured it might be a fun idea to do a quick virtual layout tour. There were a bunch of those posted over this last week as folks aren't usually able to get out to the normal layout tours that are happening this time of year under regular circumstances. So a lot of folks have been posting online, which is great because this way people from all around can see your layout and appreciate it and give you some feedback. And so I hope that you'll enjoy this little tour of the layout as it currently is, the Valley Line. And I will try and switch this around, and that way you can not see my face so much as the layout. So hopefully this will work. That's a fun fact, but apparently you can't switch from the forward-facing camera to the rear-facing camera on the fly, so I'll try and stitch these videos together later. But as I was mentioning before, I'm going to do a virtual layout tour here of my layout. This is what you'll see as you come down the basement stairs. The layout depicts the New Haven Railroad's Valley Line from Old Saybrook to Hartford, Connecticut. That's the primary focus, but as you'll see as we do this tour, the portion of the famed shoreline between New York and Boston goes right through Old Saybrook, and that is depicted here. This is the town of Old Saybrook, and we've got staging off the right there. We're looking south right now. So to the right is west and to the left is east. A little counterintuitive, but that's the only way I could lay in my basement. Staging off to the right, New Haven, New York points west and south. And then staging off the left is points east to New London, Connecticut, and Providence and Boston, and there's staging over there. So the Valley Line branches off from Old Saybrook, heading north toward Hartford. During operating sessions, obviously, we have a lift out that goes here, so you can continue north. All of the movements in Old Saybrook are directed and controlled by the dispatcher and tower operator, which sits at this desk here. All of the mainline switches are thrown from the tower here, and they are all controlled by tortoise switch machines. All the rest of the switches on the layout are manual throw. They are microengineering turnouts with the center overspring. So as we head north on the Valley Line, anybody that's been to the Essex Steam Train should recognize this scene a little bit, especially the Dickinson building, which is there. That's a stand-in for the station there. Burdick Coal there. But anyway, my good friend Bill McGuire built this from scratch. He didn't know it at the time, but it was going to lay perfectly right here, except that I did have to move the backdrop back a little bit. But the tracks, all of the tracks in Essex are depicted here, just like they are on the prototype. And that's one of the things that you'll hopefully notice and appreciate throughout the tour is that I try and follow the prototype Valley Line as much as possible. Some operators' helps that we have here, the box for the waybills, the track layout, and some reference photos to give you a sense of what it is I'm trying to do around the fascia. So as we head north, excuse the mess, had to remove some things during some construction. But as we continue north, again, if you've been on the Essex Steam Train, you'll start to recognize the town of Deep River. The Connecticut River will be right on the backdrop there. We're looking north, and the old feed store is here, the station's here, the old lace factory is there. Another building built by Bill McGuire, according to the prototype. In the era that I model, which is late 1940s, 47, 48, 49, there was actually a siding here that provided transload service to barges going down the Connecticut River, which was especially helpful during the construction of the Baldwin Bridge, which was the bridge taking the Connecticut Turnpike over the Connecticut River in Old Saybrook. The Valley Line was a high and wide load line, so girders for the bridge would actually come by rail from Hartford south to this point, and then be transloaded to barges floated down the Connecticut River to the construction site. So as we head north through here, there'll be forest-filled hill there as a view block. And as we continue north on the Valley Line, we come into the town of Padam, and it's Padam in good speeds. There is Route 82, which crosses the tracks there. Again, we're looking north, and the river would be on the backdrop. That's east. The scene here will be like this, hopefully. That scene and about that scene will hopefully be equivalent. So it's going to be a challenge to model with the river in the background rather than in the foreground, but hopefully it'll come out okay. This hill here is going to have, there was a Methodist campground. Those of you that have been to Martha's Vineyard are probably familiar with Oak Bluffs and the Methodist campground there that happened, built up in the Victorian era with all these tiny little Victorian cottages. It's absolutely beautiful. Well, Connecticut had its own equivalent of that here just north of the station area in Padam, and called Bethel, I think, Bethel Campground. But anyway, this hill will have at least one little Victorian cottage on it. We come to another scene. The Saybrook scene and this scene here were both modeled by my friend Bill Schneider, including building the little Haddam Shad Shack there. This scene you can still see today. It's a lot more overgrown, but the Shad Shack is still there. That is Route 154, which in my era is old Route 9 or the Middlesex Turnpike heading north. The Shad Shack is there, of course, and the High Bridge, which is really the scenic highlight of the Valley Line, at least on the southern end, is right here, modeled very prototypically by my friend Bill, and that's a prototype photo. So at this point, the Valley Line heads north into Middletown through the backdrop and through the wall, which is right here, to go into the other room. So that's where we're going to head next. Apologies for having to use the iPad rather than the iPhone. I only have an iPhone 6 and it doesn't really have much in the way of capacity. So I'm using the iPad instead. So that track that we just saw coming out of Shalerville will come through the wall and under the city of Middletown, and then up this track right here, up the only grade on the railroad, which is a 2% grade coming along the wall. And then the track comes south, from the south into the north, coming into Middletown. Another building built by Bill McGuire, which is standing in right now for the Middletown Meat Packer, which received cattle for slaughter and produced meat cuts, which you can see right there, another building by Bill McGuire. So as we head north into Middletown, you've got Davis Lumber there on the left. These are all just buildings, most of which are, almost all of which are by Bill McGuire off of his layout. He retired from the hobby, and so I was very blessed to receive a lot of the buildings off of his layout. It really gave me a huge jump start last year in getting construction done. So as we head north into Middletown, you come across the Middletown Diamond. This is where the airline crossed. That came from New Haven, crossed the Valley Line here in Middletown and headed over the Connecticut River, which I'm standing in now, and on up to Willimantic and Boston. Was the old airline route. And one of the compromises I had to make in layout design is that south of Middletown in the other room, you're facing east and north is to your left. And unfortunately, because of the way the layout has to lay, when you come into Middletown, now you're facing west and north is to the right. It's a little confusing, but the prototype operated basically two locals that met in East Haddam. So the locals pretty much stay geographically, where you're only heading in one direction at one time. The Valley local does go over to the other side, so it can get a little confusing, but the operators seem to pick it up pretty quickly. So this is Middletown Yard. Severely compressed, like all of Middletown is, unfortunately, but all of the key tracks are there. We got some house tracks here. Meach and Stoddard, big feed company, is back there. And as we head north, this train is on the main, that's the Valley Local heading southbound. And off the north end of the yard, and going back there, is the Berlin branch. So there was a branch off the north end of the Middletown yard that went up to East Berlin and to serve some brickyards and a paint and chemical company up there. So we'll get to East Berlin in the end of the line of that branch in a few minutes. But we're going to come back down here to the Valley line. We're continuing north. This is the coming into the town of Cromwell. That is a cool prototype photo looking exactly where you are. This will be Middlesex Turnpike there, heading north to Middletown. That scene looks very similar today, except the diner is long gone. The neatest story about that diner is there was a guy, Hal McIntyre, I think, was a saxophonist in the first Glenn Miller band, and he grew up in Cromwell and actually met Glenn Miller at that diner. Those of you that are into big bands, hopefully you'll appreciate that. As we continue north, we come into the dividend section of Rocky Hill and the largest industry on the Valley line. This building, these two buildings actually were built by my friend Dave Messer. They depict Hartford Rayon Company. It's today it's Pratt & Whitney, or a branch of Pratt & Whitney, but in the late 40s, they made rayon. During the war, they made parachutes. So this is by far the biggest shipper and receiver on the Valley line. You can see a turnout there. I'm going to be reconfiguring the track work here to depict the prototype a little bit more closely. As we continue north, dividend section of Rocky Hill, up north to the station area in Rocky Hill. Another scene built by Bill Schneider, including the structures. The station and freight house were both there until I think 2012, when the freight house, which is back here, the roof collapsed under a lot of snow, so it was torn down. But the station is still there today, and actually in better condition now than it was back in the late 40s. Passenger service on this line ended in 1933, and all the stations were taken down at that point, except for a couple, and this was one of the ones that survived. But in the era that I depict, the freight house has just gotten a new fresh coat of paint, and the station is up for lease. So it's been kind of abandoned in place for now and is up for sale or lease, and so it looks a lot more dilapidated. You can really appreciate Bill's work here when you look at the details and everything else when compared to the prototype photo, which is very cool. So as we continue north from Rocky Hill, head around the curve, and we come into the Goff Brook section, which is here. This is the right up the Rocky Hill Weathersfield line. Goes over Goff Brook here, and that's the Middlesex Turnpike. Coming north is to the right, and looking north now. Then we come into the south end of Weathersfield and Valley Coal. Just about all the buildings in Weathersfield were built by my friend Dave Messer, including this whole complex here. The only thing I built here, other than the track and the scenery, is the coal tipple here that would take coal from hoppers and put it into bins. But he did Dave did the office and the tanks and everything, all based on prototype photos. As we continue north into Weathersfield, it's Grey Rock Bottling Company, also by Dave Messer. The station is one that I purchased. I'm not quite sure who built that, but I got it from somebody at some point. And continuing north into Weathersfield proper, you've got Weathersfield Lumber, which I built, and starting the scenery in this area. I also built this little Cape Cod house and garage, which has a little bit of repair going on down here. And then Dave also built John Wallace's house. Now, anybody that's followed the blog knows who John Wallace is. He is one of the primary inspirations and sources of information about the Valley Line. He grew up in this house that's right alongside the railroad tracks. This is Fernwood Street right here. And he grew up there and took a lot of pictures of the line during the late 40s when he was in high school. And his photos and reminiscences really provide just about all of the fodder for this project. And so Dave Messer was kind enough to build a duplicate copy of John Wallace's house, which is still there today, but painted here as it was in 1948. As we continue north, that's Ballantyne's beer distributor, just north of Jordan Lane, which is right here. And continuing north from Weathersfield, you go under the Route 15 overpass, which was the Wilbur-Cross Parkway, I think, at the time. And then you see Hartford in the distance. You can see the Blue Onion Dome and the Travelers Tower. That actual skyline is from the late 40s, actually from a postcard that my friend Bob Belitsky had somebody colorized for me, and then I blew up. Postcard is tough to blow up to use as a backdrop, but I think it works okay here. At least it suggests the existence of Hartford north of here. And this is where the Valley Line goes back into staging, which on my railroad ends up going back through the backdrop and back into Middletown Yard. So this makes it one huge reverse loop, but Middletown Yard in that sense represents Hartford staging as well. Speaking of Middletown Yard, you may recall that the Berlin branch took off from the north end of Middletown Yard. Well, this is where it comes in to the scene from Middletown here. A little bit of modeler's license. It doesn't go under Route 15. On the prototype, these are miles apart, these two sections. But it does, on the prototype, go across the Mattabesset River, which is here. Then there's the station, abandoned at this point. The station actually is still there today, but used much heavily modified and used as an office for a local company. A building built by Dave Messer. Backdrop and scenery are my work. Buildings are work of others. This is another building by Bill McGuire there. And that's where we're going to be simulating or representing the loading of bricks, because I can't get a brickyard on here, but the brick industry was a big part of the reason why the Berlin branch stayed around for so long. And then this building here, also by Bill McGuire, will represent Stanley Chemical Company, which is another reason why the Berlin branch stayed in service. It was a huge producer of paint at the time. So that brings us to the end of the Valley Line. One of the things that, and excuse the walking here, but one of the things that I tried to model as well is a portion of the airline, which you'll recall came across the Diamond in Middletown way back there. But before we go and see the airline, I'll show you one of my workshops. So this is the paint workshop. Excuse the mess, but yeah, it's a workshop. And spray booth, paints, and scenery supplies, which are, whoa, okay. Sorry about that. Didn't mean to make anybody dizzy. Depending on the feedback and level of interest, I could do another video on the actual workbench that I use for modeling, and you can see all the wall of car kits I've got to do and whatnot. But and there's that's where the crew lounge is too, but we can do that some other time if people are interested. So just a little bit of the operations stuff. We won't get into now. We can maybe do operations for another video. Again, this is Saybrook. Now the airline pokes out through the wall behind Middletown, and then comes in through the wall and then arrives here. So the towns for the airline, unlike the rest of the layout, are just freelance. These were part of modules that I had before with all structures salvaged off of a friend's layout, and just use here to be the airline operationally, but not intended to depict any of the prototype airline. So we're looking northeast here. That's heading toward Middletown. And as we go southwest toward Cedar Hill Yard in New Haven, we head through that tunnel. And then there is typically a lift out here. Obviously there'd have to be, but it's removed now for access to the breaker boxes. And then comes into the other module here. This is the fella, Chet Reck, who, if you follow the blog, you know who that is. I did a feature on him a few weeks ago. And let's see, we continue south. This is through the town of Somerset. This here is the New Haven staging. This is the staging box. This is where all the trains from the west and south come from. And as we continue southwest on the airline, we go through here. I'll be modeling a generic airline looking farm scene here. And then it goes through there, across the doorway, and into a one-track staging for New Haven there. So that's it. Sorry if it went a little long, but I'm fortunate that I've got a lot to show. I don't know, with the current craziness, how often or when the next operating session is going to be. I usually can accommodate anywhere from 8 to 11 operators on this railroad, but I think, like a lot of us, we're wondering what the future has for larger layouts and larger operating sessions, and a lot of folks are just operating their railroads by themselves right now, if they're operating at all. I, for one, am not doing much in the way of operating. I've been concentrating on trying to get some more scenery done and get the Wethersfield scene done. And then after Wethersfield, I'll be concentrating on Old Saybrook, finishing it up. I still have to do some ballast, more backdrop work, and try to finish up this scene. So hopefully you enjoyed this tour. If you did, I hope that you'll let me know, and give a thumbs up, or whatever else they say on YouTube, to like and subscribe. Or the most important thing is if you could just take the time to leave a comment and let me know what you think, provide some feedback, constructive criticism, whatever. That'd be awesome. And I hope you and your family are doing well, staying safe and healthy. And on the other side of this, I hope to get together either in person or virtually like this. You guys take care.